Hey everyone, and welcome to Big Red Homestead. I'm Josh, that's Caleb, and today, it is time. Nebraska, Colorado, about as hype of a game as you can get right now. Tickets are insanely expensive. It may as well be the Super Bowl, and we have a ton to talk about today. Obviously, we got to talk about whether or not Colorado's overrated, what our thoughts are on X factors for this game, keys to the game, and of course, the almighty juicy predictions. It's going to be a fun one. So, Caleb, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. This game is crazy. I have never seen a team go from like 120th to 10th in the national mindset
In 1 week.
Ever in college. Yeah, in one week. We are in uncharted waters.
Yeah, I mean, to say the least. Basically, we can just hop right into this thing and start off with this game and talk about everything and all things Colorado. So obviously, when it comes to this game itself, the odds have been all over the place. If you found a place that allowed you to live bet during the games, I'm sure that line was going nuts. I mean, beforehand, like Nebraska was opening it like some places over 10-point favorites like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And now the line is to Colorado's favored by around 2 or 3, depending on which site you look at. So
it probably hasn't stopped by the end of this.
And yeah, it'll probably keep sliding for a little bit. And the points are at 57.5 right now. So they're expecting a pretty high scoring game after what we saw with Colorado and TCU, I would assume. But there's still so many X factors here. So let's just start big picture and your thoughts on this Colorado team and reaction to the TCU game, what you learned about Colorado, and what are your thoughts heading into the Nebraska game as a whole?
Yeah, there was a lot of question marks on Shedeur Sanders, just where he would be. I think everybody looks to him right away, which makes sense. He's the quarterback, and he did great things at Jackson State. We saw him grade out pretty well. But again, this competition level, Alabama A&M is a lot different than TCU on the road. And right. I think there's nobody here that would sit there and say that differently. So, and with this new team, and man, he looked nice. I will say that he made a lot of great throws, especially down the field sidelines throws.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was where it was most impressive. TCU was kind of given a solid amount of cushion, especially just like they're trying to keep it all in front of them because they were unable to most of the game. I wasn't, that impressed with their secondary. But I will say on some of those one-on-one matchups where it was man coverage, some of those wide receivers make great catches, some of the Hunter ones and, otherwise. But man, I think Shedeur Sanders, he threw a good ball. And again, he looked so poised in the pocket. He got sacked 5 times and he was just ready to keep slinging. He was impressive. Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. Obviously, that's where you have to start. But he threw for 510 yards and 5 touchdowns. What else could you say? Yeah, exactly. I mean, he basically played a spotless game. Basically, only 1 or 2 throws were worth debating whether or not they were good or not, or how bad they were. I mean, it was nearly a spotless game. And like you said, I mean, his ability inside and outside the pocket to create space, buy himself time, and he was just unbelievably accurate. So it's just incredibly impressive all the way around. I mean, I watched almost the whole game live and literally the whole time, I'm just like, my goodness, every throw made me just a little bit more nervous about this game. And he showed up and showed out, to say the least. I mean, genuinely impressive and looks like an NFL level quarterback for sure. Exactly what type of the scouts are looking for with NFL. So we'll see how that ends up playing out season long. But I mean, obviously when you pair that with the other weapons that they have, with the speed on the offensive side, I mean, even at running back with Dylan Edwards looked really, really good. Yeah, really good as a freshman, yeah. And so, I mean, you got to be impressed overall with the ability, the talent that they have on the offensive side and the athleticism across the board. Even with a bad offensive line, it doesn't matter if you have just so many of those skill guys that can work out. Hunter looked nice, Edwards looked nice, right. And even some of those other wide receivers as well. Yeah, Jimmy Horn. They had 4 guys with over 100 receiving yards. So, right. Now that begs the question for me was TCU overhyped after obviously a Cinderella run? Statistically and the metrics, everybody was shocked with how much TCU overachieved last year. And that was with Max Duggan, again, who TCU kept getting in these shootout situations, but they had a guy that could, again, like Sanders, finish those games. Do we think that TCU, just because it also overachieved and lost 8 dudes to the draft, do we think that they were a legit top 25 team? Or do we think that, how much of a slide are they on? I mean, it depends what game you're looking at. If you watch the Georgia game, you're going to say no. But if you're watching the Michigan game last year, you'd say yes. So it just depends. I mean, does Michigan lose 65-7 to Georgia? Highly doubt it.
Yeah. So I don't know. It is
that
tough
Michigan
to say.
That Michigan game, if for those who remember too, like there was some pretty wild calls and penalties.
Yeah.
Michigan kind of got shafted a few times.
I mean, what's crazy is Colorado played TCU last year and it was actually pretty close up until like the fourth quarter. I think it ended up being like 38 to 13 last year. So it wasn't like a huge blowout or anything, which is interesting considering how bad Colorado was. Like you said, dialing more into how good TCU actually is what's going to be tough. I mean, right, it's not easy for any team to replace so much NFL talent. I think they had eight players drafted last year, and obviously a handful more that went to the league undrafted. Like, when you have like a first round pick like Quentin Johnston, and like then you have Kendre Miller and Darius Davis and Steve Avila, like all of these offensive talented guys. Steve Avila was a second round draft pick. And then you have Max Duggan as well. So it's like offensively, you have like 5 legit NFL players. And on the defensive side, I think they had like 3 or 4 guys that got drafted on the defensive side. So you already have a defense last year that was already torched most of the season. I mean, when you look at like statistical ranks, they were outside the top 100 in big plays given up and a lot of important statistics. So it's like, obviously their defense was not what's winning them games last year. It was obviously their offense. That's where you have to look at this season. You're like, okay, well, is it possible TCU is just unbelievably overrated? I think it is. It's a world where they could potentially finish the season unranked and go like 7-5 or 8 and maybe 8-4.
New QB as well, first game.
Right.
He just
and maybe he gets better over time.
He did, and he looked. I saw a lot of solid things that they can clean up as well. Again, especially on the offensive side, but defense, it did seem kind of like a bottomless void of this might be the type of game that it is for them the whole season. And you're just like, how many of those shootouts are you going to really walk away with when the gunslinger that you had last year that got you as far as it did is gone?
Colorado, of course, TCU runs the 3-3-5. So they're already exposed to this. You see what they were able to put up offensively against the 3-3-5 defense. Obviously, the question is, how talented is Nebraska versus TCU? And we're going to be playing a completely different style of game, obviously. Colorado ran over 60 plays in the first half alone. And Nebraska and Minnesota, neither of them even reached 60 plays in the game. So, it's going to be a strange style of game where TCU and Colorado both wanted to go extremely fast, run, hurry up, no huddle, and snap as much as possible. And the exact opposite for both teams in Nebraska and Minnesota. So it's a really interesting dynamic when going between these two games.
I really think that's going to help Nebraska because I think we're going to be frustrating in the same way that the Big Ten is, where it's a time of possession game. And the one positive for Matt Rhule is, in the years with Scott Frost, when we had faster offenses, Minnesota would absolutely dominate the clock time of possession, where it'd be frustrating because, they could eat up the clock and then our offense would go really fast, 3 and out. And then we don't see the ball for another 8 minutes. And I think that plays into Nebraska's hands because we're not going to give Colorado that many snaps. We can't give Colorado that many snaps and have a chance to win.
Not in that elevation.
With our offense. So we're going to try to run the ball. And the great thing with that is Colorado's defense was not good, worse even than TCU's. That's going to give us a real opportunity in the run game. We're going to have a lot of play action, a lot of really nice stuff this week. I like our chances a lot.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe we can just start transitioning over into X factors and talk about more of these things in depth. So like I said, I mean, the first really basic X factor is Colorado's experience in the 3-3-5 versus Tony White's ability to innovate and use the film from this game to really throw some new looks at Colorado. Like we said, I mean, it's possible that our defense just fits this 3-3-5 better. And part of why we were excited about this was because the personnel for Nebraska did fit the 3-3-5 very well.
Yes.
I think there's still upside here, even though Colorado's experienced and faced this 3-3-5 already.
Yeah, I'm much more excited about our safeties. I think that TCU just had a really rough time with safety play. Like, just the guys taking bad angles. Their
whole secondary got absolutely smoked.
Yeah. So, and in the same way where we kept everything in front of us at Minnesota. We saw similar stuff with those, short crossing routes where Colorado would get touchdowns off those 5-yard routes that turn into burns because nobody could make a tackle. And we saw the same thing with Minnesota with Crooms, again, another guy who was a speedster. And it's not like Minnesota had a bad wide receiver core. I'm not going to say it's better than Colorado's. I'm going to say it's at least comparable. Yeah, it's definitely comparable. And yeah, maybe not the peak of like Travis Hunter, but Again, guys that are really good. And we kept everything in front of us. I think the same way they're going to have to earn it now. Obviously, Ethan is not the same as Shedeur.
You don't say.
But similar in a lot of ways on escaping the pocket and being a dual threat.
That would head into probably the biggest X factor is, well, broadly how to stop or shut down or slow down Shedeur Sanders. But in the same point, Colorado's running game basically didn't exist in this game. All of it was dump off passes, screen plays, release routes into the flats. I mean, essentially, they did nothing on the ground. They had 29 attempts for 87 yards with a long of 10 in this game. Like, for example, Dylan Edwards, who looked like a really nice player, only had 6 carries for 24 yards, but he's a running back who ended up with 135 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns through the air. So it's like, that doesn't seem sustainable long term, especially in a game where Nebraska's want to grind it out. I think it'll be interesting to see how exactly we minimize their offense and try to actually take advantage of them being a one-dimensional style offense.
Every time that they did run those, it was not between the tackles. They were going outside. They did not trust the offensive line. And again, they were trying to burn TCU on the outside, off the edge, because that was their best chance. TCU was just missing assignments. If you were in man or if you were in zone, like, you got to know where those running backs are, where the outlet pass is, those safety valves for Shedeur Sanders, because time and time again, those were the touchdowns. It was the broken plays where it was a miscommunication on like those zones and nobody picked up one guy and he just went unnoticed. I'm excited to see, again, Nebraska, who seems a little bit more disciplined and making them earn it. And, again, that's kudos to Colorado on doing some nice things to confuse TCU. But I think, again, with a week of tape, Nebraska really knows of what they want to do, where they want to attack.
They'll be more prepared for sure. The question mark will be is whether or not our athleticism lives up to the task. Obviously, I would go to assume TCU has a higher level of athlete on average than Nebraska right now on the defensive side. So the question will be is preparation and playing fast, being more comfortable in the 3-3-5 in this defense, being more understanding what's to be expected from Colorado could help us play faster and be more anticipatory of how they're going to play. It is hard to assume that this linebacking core is going to be as effective in the flats and covering space than TCU was. And that's probably a big worry for me. It feels like we're going to be absolutely exposed out there in the flats near the sidelines, especially if we're trying to play man to man. So the first real huge X factor for me in this game is finding ways to get pressure while only sending 4. This Colorado offensive line isn't good by any means. And we saw that. Colorado knew that was not the case. They were throwing the ball quickly, getting the ball out of Shedeur's hands very fast at any chance that he could. Statistically, he only averaged 1.98 seconds when not pressured because they were getting the ball out of his hands so fast. But he averaged 4.18 seconds to throw when he was pressured because he was just getting out of the pocket, running around forever and trying to extend the play. The question mark will be for is Nebraska capable of getting to the quarterback sending 4? TCU, they pressured Colorado and had 5 sacks. But what was interesting was that Shedeur was actually better while blitzed. And so you have to find ways to actually get there without blitzing because otherwise he's going to pick you apart and piece you apart.
Those scramble drills, they were really good in creating that chaos after, once the play was broken. It's going to take a lot of discipline on our secondary's behalf, like to stay on your guys. And then also, like you said, I don't think our defensive line is going to be able to get to him. We saw that, the defensive line could break through, but, I don't, in the same way, I don't think Nash or, Blaze is really going to be able to get to Shedeur Sanders. But if we can have the linebackers break through, if that 4th guy, wherever that's going to be found, like he's going to have to be able to get to Shedeur Sanders.
In this game, when he was kept clean, he completed 88% of his passes with a 91.4 PFF grade. 30 of 34. So 34 of his attempts were where he was kept completely clean and got the ball out quick. When he was under pressure, he completed 61.5%, which is still very good under pressure, actually.
Yes.
And he was throwing the ball deep while under pressure, which I guess makes sense because you're holding on the ball a little bit longer for those routes to develop. It's going to come down to a lot of one-on-one matchups on the outside. Really, it's going to come down to Malcolm Hartzog and Quentin Newsome and how our secondary reacts and whether or not they can hold their own while our front 4 tries to get to Shedeur Sanders. I was like, in this game, like TCU, their best pass rusher was Paul Oyewale, and he wasn't that effective. I think we have a few guys up front who could at least do that in this game. And so I get excited about the potential there is where I feel like even though, we're not as the potential to be as explosive as a defense, we do seem to have a pretty good fundamental backbone for this team.
Yeah.
And we saw John Bullock and Javin Wright and some of these guys, even Ty Robinson down the middle, have success. And that was against a better offensive line, probably a significantly better offensive line than Colorado just after 1 week. I mean, Nebraska's offensive line was not good and did not grade out well, but Colorado's was even worse. And so there's going to be opportunity
things
here.
You love to see.
There's going to be opportunity here. And if you have any chance to stop Shedeur Sanders, it's going to be through pressure, especially up the middle, to disrupt his rhythm and hopefully force a few mistakes. His only really bad throw was on a play where he was pressured on third down and he tried to force it into a spot.
Yeah, it was almost picked.
It should have been picked.
Yeah.
There's where I think the potential lies in this game.
Yeah, it's good to know it's there. Like, he is human. He can be beat. He can make a mistake. I cannot wait for the Quentin Newsome Travis Hunter matchup. Like, I cannot wait to watch back tape on this. This is a huge opportunity again for both guys. Like, again, this is a nice Big Ten corner for Hunter. And then this is again, a great challenge for Quentin Newsome as well. This is a game that, it will be looked back on, for NFL scouts for both guys. I'm excited about our secondary. I know you said they aren't that athletic, and I agree with you somewhat in the middle, but I think Reimer can do enough. I think Gifford can do enough. And again, with studying this tape, I agree. Deshaun Singleton, you have Deshaun Singleton's breakout, and he looks really good. And again, in a Minnesota game where at this point, and this is something we should have brought up earlier, it is I would even say likely that Minnesota is a better team than TCU this year. And I don't know why that's not getting talked about. Minnesota's a much better team than TCU.
So I think Minnesota. It seems like people are writing off like, if Colorado would have played Minnesota, it would have been a blowout.
Minnesota's a fringe top 25 team going into this season.
Right. Well, yeah, they had AP poll votes. So it's like,
and TCU was, an overrated team that had a ton of question marks, but you had to give them a ranking because
they were in the
what they did
national
last year.
championship, right?
But they were still barely in the rankings.
I mean, if you put Tyler Nubin on TCU, who knows? It's like
exactly. Yeah, we saw on the field. Yeah, Travis Hunter, he's nice, but Tyler Nubin's a better player.
It could be close by the end of the year.
Yeah, that's true. It
could be close by the end of the year. But I think then even if you talk second or third or fourth best players at this point, I mean, I would say Minnesota. If you compare that to TCU, though. I mean, Minnesota might have 4 or 5 better players than TCU's best player on the defensive side. And
then we played a much more difficult team. And people are like, Minnesota sucked. Nebraska played good on defense. That's what happened. Nebraska played a good game on defense. And yes, Ethan is not Shedeur Sanders, but those weapons that Minnesota had are comparable than Colorado's.
Yeah, I agree. So with that said, I think we head into our predictions here. So what are your thoughts? Fire away. Go off. What are your thoughts here on Nebraska, Colorado? In Colorado, where are you at?
Last week, Colorado made a statement win, as they should. Deion's a great coach. He's exciting. We talked about him being our head coach last year. It was obvious that he was going to do good things, and it's exciting that a father-son duo is just a cool thing in college football as well. I mean,
it's a good story,
it's really
obviously.
Cool. It's a great story. And then again, Hunter playing both sides of the ball, tons of respect. He's a fun national player to watch for that reason. I love that he's got YouTube videos posted online. I mean, talking the talk.
Dude, they're the flashiest team ever.
They're so cool, and I get why they get all the hype. But Nebraska is legit Big Ten defense.
You're pulling a Lee Corso right here.
Exactly. Not so fast. Okay. Nebraska is legit Big Ten defense. In the same way that everybody's tilted for Colorado, people tilted against Nebraska last week.
Dude, this is the most uneven, uneven line, odds line of all time. It's like a 3-point spread, 2-point spread. Some have it at a 1-point spread. And it's like, you think the whole world is on Colorado here. It's insane.
And in the same way that Sims looked so bad last week and, we don't have a quarterback. He can't throw. All of this noise where it's like, okay, Minnesota had a great game plan for us. We didn't have Marcus Washington for the first half of the game, which was night and day difference on what Sims looked like. Sim looked worse in the first half. Colorado's defense is not Minnesota's defense. Minnesota was a top 2 defense last year, and then they're probably a top 15,
in
25 at worst. Yeah, in points per game this year. they're not the same. This is not equal footing. Jeff Sims is going to look really good this game. I guarantee, like 114, he had 114 rush yards and barely any pass yards. Oh, it's going to be different. It's going to look a lot different.
I mean, yeah, I agree.
And like Nebraska fans are going to get excited because we're going to score this football. This is easy. And guess what? Colorado, it's not going to be easy like it was this last week. So I'm picking Nebraska to win.
Oh.
Again, all this tilt's crazy. On both sides, we got to calm down. We got to look at the facts objectively, look at the stats, understand what we've seen. And what we see is people already believed in Travis Hunter. Obviously, Shedeur Sanders, he took a leap and exciting for him. But I still think that top to bottom, roster to roster, we have the deeper, more experienced team that can beat this Colorado. So I'm going to pick Nebraska 28-23.
Oh, low scoring compared to the line there. So pretty significantly under the line. 23? Wow, 23. That's a pretty bold. That's a pretty bold take.
Clamps.
Okay.
Seatbelt.
Welcome to the Big Ten.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I like it. I like it a lot. Again, for me, the natural instinct for me is when the line and the public expectation don't align, I love going towards the Vegas line because Vegas, ball don't lie. At the end of the day, they have to make their money. And there's a reason why this line's like basically a toss-up game. It is a toss-up game.
Yes.
To me, it's blatantly obvious that it's a toss-up game. You have basically two decent players on Colorado. You could argue 3 or 4. And then the rest of the roster is still,
Edwards
bottom.
As well, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Bottom barrel level roster, especially the offensive line, which is even worse than Nebraska's. And that's saying something.
That's saying a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And even with our horrible offensive line, we nearly beat Minnesota last week because I think that's the testament to the rest of our roster. Well, the good coaching that this roster definitely has. Obviously, with Colorado, they outperformed all expectations. I agree. Minnesota's a better team than TCU. And obviously, you're comparing apples and oranges with Big Ten and Big 12 a lot of the times. To me, it's always hard, though, when you're picking against the significantly better quarterback. And I mean, Shedeur Sanders, he looks like the real deal. And when you pick against potentially the 2 best players on the field, obviously Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, who at this point probably will be the 2 best players on the field in this game.
Yeah.
That's a hard bet to make, especially when the team's on the road, especially when it's only the second game of the year, especially when Colorado loves moving fast and you're going to be playing in a high altitude environment where Colorado obviously is used to this thing. And this defense, there's a world where this defense does not play as well as they did against Minnesota because of that fact, because they get gassed out by the second half. This game opens up in the second half and just basically busts open like this TCU Colorado game did. And that is definitely a worry for me. So I've gone back and forth over it the last 48 hours. The thing that I couldn't get out of my mind is the lack of athleticism from our front 7 and what we saw Colorado do to TCU. I think it's easy for us to say that we want to get pressure and that we want to disrupt Shedeur, but the bottom line is TCU definitely couldn't. And we just have more questions on offense than TCU does. And so that's where the bottom line ends up being for me. So I'm going to pick Colorado to win in a really devastating loss once again. I'm going to go 33-31 and take the over on the points, which has been taking over on the points for Nebraska has not been a good call recently. So I kind of I prefer your line a little bit, but I'm going to take the barn burner of a 33-31 devastating loss on the road and kind of play the same narrative. Again, the devastating loss
Jeff
on the
Sims
road
is going to look a lot better this game.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I agree. If we put up 31 points, we're going to feel pretty good. The 33 probably going to come from a few turnovers on our end. And then I do think this defense is going to get a little bit gassed out in the second half. I don't feel good about this one. This is way less confident of a pick than picking Nebraska's points on the Minnesota last week. But
yeah,
there's so many question marks with Colorado. It's going to be tough. So long story short, it's going to be a wild one. I always prefer when we're split on our predictions because it makes it way more interesting when we head into the game.
Yes.
But drop your guys' predictions down below. We want to see them, obviously. And join the Discord.
Another chance for me to be right.
Exactly. And join the Discord. We have a few more spots open for the Fantasy Football League. So if you want to play us in fantasy football, join the Discord down below. But as always, guys, I'm Josh. That's Caleb. This has been Big Red Homestead. And we'll see you next time. Go Big Red, baby.